Hello, everyone. 안녕하세요, 여러분. Welcome. 저는 백순기입니다. My name is Alma Sungi Beck. I use she, her pronouns in English, and in Korean, we don't have gendered pronouns. I am one of the 3 climate justice co-chairs for our chapter, the Climate Reality Project Bay Area chapter. And we are so pleased to have you join us this evening for our 3rd program in our 2021-2022 Indigenous Voices Speaker Series and our chapter-wide event for April Earth Month 2022. I will also be your moderator for today's program. The mission of the Climate Reality Project is to catalyze a global solution to the climate crisis by making urgent action a necessity across every sector of society. To meet this mission, the Climate Reality Project is committed to showing up and standing with all people who experience social injustice and racism of any kind. As an organization fighting for climate justice, we have a responsibility to speak out against systematic racism and against systems of racial superiority, whether aware or unaware, that perpetuate violence and harm against BIPOC people and communities. BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, and other people of color. Before we introduce our speakers for the main program, my friend and colleague, Dr. Bonnie Hamilton, one of the co-chairs of the Bay Area chapter, will offer a land acknowledgement, followed by Harriet Harvey Horn, the other co-chair of our chapter, who will give us a few announcements about upcoming chapter programs. Then I will introduce the speakers, and during the program, we will also have opportunities for breakout groups to allow you all to connect with each other on a smaller scale about some of the questions that will be raised from tonight's program. Finally, we will be taking a 1-minute screen break about every 20 minutes. This is to rest our eyes and our minds. It's also to make the program more accessible for people for whom English might not be our first language. So for tonight's land acknowledgement, Dr. Bonnie Hamilton, co-chair of the Bay Area chapter.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you, Alma. Hello and welcome. And I am Bonnie Hamilton. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm honored to present tonight's acknowledgement of the land. This is an updated land acknowledgement, one that evolves and grows as we build connections with local Indigenous groups, and most recently with the involvement and invitation from one of tonight's speakers, Dr. Jonathan Cordero from the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone. The program description for tonight's event discusses how Indigenous people who consist of less than 5% of the world's population, but who protect 80% of global biodiversity, according to National Geographic, and how efforts to protect Indigenous sovereignty and treaty rights have kept billions of tons of carbon in the ground, equivalent to 1/4 the annual emissions from both the US and Canada combined, according to the 2021 pamphlet, Indigenous Resistance Against Carbon, which, if you haven't read it yet, is available online as a joint publication of the Indigenous Environmental Network and Oil Change International. So the questions for us as climate activists and also as settlers, occupiers, and guests on the lands of the Native peoples of the San Francisco Bay Area. What is our role, our place, and our connection to the land and to the original peoples? What protocols should we be observing from our own cultures and in respect and recognition of the cultures of the Bay Area's Native peoples? What should we notice, learn, and support with regard to local Indigenous peoples and efforts to protect Indigenous sovereignty, language, and culture? Where do we need to build relationships and uplift the efforts to protect Indigenous self-governance and treaty rights, and to move forward efforts to give back and rematriate land to the original Native peoples of the Bay Area? From this perspective, I offer this acknowledgement of the land and of the original peoples of these lands, the Ohlone bands of Ramaytush, Karkan, Chochenyo, and Tamian, the Coast Miwok, Bay Miwok, Sierra Miwok, the Pomo, Potwin, Yokuts, and Wapo. We are blessed and proud of our chapter's robust Indigenous Voices project. In addition to tonight's program, we have a group that meets on the last Thursday of each month, our Indigenous Voices reading group and listening circle, where we read, watch, and discuss articles, books, and videos by and about Indigenous people, particularly as it relates to our work as climate activists. In the reading group, we seek to build connection, understanding, and learning about these very questions that we hope to address this evening. Please keep engaging with our climate justice team and the chapter's Indigenous Voices work. Visit our website to learn more and join us to continue our learning together as we build a stronger, more connected, more grounded climate justice movement. Thank you all for being here tonight.
And now our other chapter co-chair, Harriet Harvey Horn, to talk about the Bay Area chapter and some of our upcoming events.
All right, thank you so much, Alma. I want to first share a little bit more about the Climate Reality Project and the Bay Area chapter. The Climate Reality Project is an international nonprofit organization founded and chaired by former US Vice President and Nobel laureate Al Gore. Mr. Gore founded Climate Reality in 2006, shortly after the release of his award-winning documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, with a mission to mobilize a global grassroots network of climate advocates. Today, Climate Reality spans 170 countries with over 40,000 climate reality leaders around the world trained by Mr. Gore to speak truth to power about the climate crisis and its solutions. Our activities are anchored in the Climate Reality Project mission to educate and inform the public, to use a climate justice lens for diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in all we do, and to mobilize a grassroots network of climate advocates to take action that will lead us to a cleaner, safer, more prosperous, and thriving future. The Bay Area chapter is one of the largest and earliest regional chapters of the Climate Reality Project. We take its mission to the local level with almost 1,500 members catalyzing solutions to address the climate crisis and climate justice across 8 counties and the many municipalities in the Bay Area. With hundreds of local climate leaders trained by Mr. Gore and hundreds more committed community members, we are a tight-knit team taking urgent action to broadly adopt solutions to the crisis. Our goal is for the Bay Area and California to lead and serve as a compelling model of a regenerative future for the rest of the United States and the world. Now, without further ado, I'll turn the program back over to Alma and our amazing speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Harriet. Thank you, Bonnie. So on to our main program. I'm going to introduce the speakers now. Sara Moncada is a Native educator, dancer, filmmaker, author, and cultural arts advocate. She is CEO of the Cultural Conservancy, a Native-led nonprofit working in Indigenous rights and revitalization projects, is co-founder of Wise Women's Circles, a women-owned media company, and is co-director of Siwam American Indian Dance, a Bay Area-based cultural arts and education organization. Sara presents internationally on Native American arts and culture and is co-author of the book, The Dance of Caring, a book exploring Native American hoop dance as a model for wellness. She is producer of the internationally successful documentary film Nurses, If Florence Could See Us Now, and the upcoming film project Finding Compas, and is producer of the Cultural Conservancy's The Native Seed Pod, a new podcast series that explores and celebrates traditional seeds, native foodways, and traditional ecological knowledge. Jonathan Cordero, PhD, is a founder and executive director of the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone, ARO, affiliated scholar in the Indigenous Law Center at UC Hastings College of the Law, and visiting scholar in the Spatial Sciences Institute at University of Southern California. Dr. Cordero's research revises previous scholarship on California Indian and Spanish relations during the mission period. He works as a consultant in both the public and private sectors, especially in the arts, and he serves as a leader, speaker, and activist in the broader Ohlone and Chumash communities. Welcome, Sara and Jonathan. So we're going to start off with our first question that was actually in the program description, which is, what does climate justice look like from a Native perspective? And I believe, Jonathan, you were going to start. Jonathan, you're muted.
Gotcha. Thank you, Alma, and haku, everyone. Thank you all for being here today. I want to start by just saying that both Sara and I come from two different Native traditions. And so just pay attention to some of those differences. It's actually quite remarkable that we usually end up in the same place. So you'll hear a lot of similarities in the places where we land, but probably not, and probably some differences in how we get there. The issue of climate justice for me as a Native person, and maybe to some degree for the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples and others, really evolves out of our understanding of our responsibilities in the world. And one of the things that I think we should begin by noting is that very often Native peoples will talk about their responsibilities first and primary, and not our rights. And that is usually situates us differently from our non-Native counterparts. So in our Chumash tradition, for example, our ancestors have taught us that our primary responsibilities are to care for Mother Earth and to care for the people who reside in our ancestral homeland, or in this case, including also our Native communities, in the same way that Mother Earth has cared for us for millennia. And those two responsibilities for us obviously sort of foreground this relationship between climate or nature and justice, which is, in this case, we're considering that for persons of color or communities of color. In my circles, we use a different kind of language for climate justice. We talk about the intersection between ecology and equity, just a little bit easier for us to remember. But the notion is the same. So when we talk about climate justice, then we're really talking about it as a responsibility that is given to us in our teachings, and that inevitably derives from our relationship with our Earth Mother. In the work that we do, generally speaking, we always note an intersection between ecology, or what you might call, greenery to some degree, and race/ethnicity, and then also income. So in a lot of the work that I'm doing in the Bay Area, and a lot of the work that we're doing in our research with down in Los Angeles, we're noting that if you look on maps of places, and this is just one way of thinking about climate justice, if you look at maps of cities, you'll notice that there is more greenery in places where there are fewer persons of color and higher incomes. And that correlation is, of course, important because exposure to greenery has a direct impact on our mental health, right? On our spiritual well-being as well. So in ways like that, and of course in the bigger ways that we'll talk about in the context of this talk, there's obviously a direct relationship between the two. And it's very rare that we just talk about the ecology and not also about its implications for equity in the world that we live in. Thank you.
Sara, anything to add?
Well, Lias and Chanyevo, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much. Recognizing that even on the other side of the world, it might not be evening, to our international guests, wherever you are. I hope that this circle finds you doing well. It's beautiful the way that Jonathan kind of leads us into the beginning of this conversation, because he's absolutely right. Neither he nor I talk for all Native people. We are only us. We're only ourselves. And in our capacity to do so, we reach into the knowledge systems that are available to us through our particular families, lineages, ancestries, and circles of community. And Jonathan's circles are very informative to him for where he stands and where he lives and where his ancestry informs him from. And mine informs me from somewhere else. It's a different ecology. And therefore, how do I reflect in those differences? Now, my original instructions that echo and reverberate through the stories of my bloodlines are very clear in understanding that we as people entered into this world through a deep relationship with a tree. Therefore, we were not first. We are simply a member of the ecology. And as we entered into those relationships, we recognize that our responsibility is to show up the best way we know how in that thriving ecology. Now, we are no greater, more important than any other member of that ecology because we recognize we dance in a circle. We are a part of a system. And when pieces of that system start to fall down, the whole system falls down. And when we reflect on the teachings that are embedded within our original instructions, our originating in stories, our capacity to relate to our ecologies and our systems, we can see the reflections of stepping away from that relationship and our current framework. We can look around and say, oh, when you step away from relationship in a certain capacity, you lose things, you leave things behind. And when you start to leave things behind, you start to think about what is all of the other stuff that was there that we now no longer hear, now no longer touch, now no longer speak to each other. And can we come back to those knowledge systems? And when we do, what kinds of things are there available to us to learn from and to reignite and to bring back into relationship? And so really, I look at my responsibility in this world. My responsibility first as a good human being, my responsibility next as a good family member, and then a good community member, and then a good member of this ecosystem and ecology overall. When I look at across the whole scope of that responsibility, I understand that really what I'm here to do is be a good member of this relationship. And to listen and to try and respond in a good way. That's probably where we start.
So shall we move on to our next question? So the next question is, what is a land acknowledgement? Whichever one of you wants to start.
Okay, I see the nod. Wow, you ask a very good question, and one that I know is such a timely topic. This is really the call of our timeline right now when these different conversations elevate in the large scope. We recognize as Indigenous people that the elevation of kind of Indigenous awareness in the larger kind of Western dominant framework kind of comes and goes, right? There's these moments where it elevates and comes up, and we have the capacity to kind of talk about things and shift things. Then it kind of goes away again for a little while and kind of comes back up again. And as we've come back up again in this most recent kind of social environmental wave where we're really as a human collective across the planet kind of hopingly shaking it up a little bit and looking around to see what's going on. One of the big conversations that has risen has definitely been this conversation around land acknowledgements. Now, I can give you my thoughts on that. And I want to kind of lean back into that first conversation that I said a couple of minutes ago, that said I can really only represent the voice that I carry. And while I'm an Indigenous person, I understand that when you're one of the only Native people in the room, you somehow end up carrying that voice for a lot more than you may have intended to. In a way, I want to use that as a framework to talk about land acknowledgements. Because we run the risk of thinking that land acknowledgements are kind of a one-size-fits-all experience. Like, oh, we have to get through this practice and this thought process and create this statement. And then this statement becomes the thing that we've got. And then it can go on the website and it can be talked about and it can be said at every Zoom meeting and at every in-person meeting. And then we can even have all of the people across the organization take that one acknowledgement statement and share it in perpetuity. And that is absolutely one course to take when you look at the many paths that are in front of you, when you want to again reignite, reawaken, reconnect, remember that original relationship with your ecology. We are a part of a natural ecosystem, and we spend a lot of time working in our current world to kind of get away from that natural ecology, right? We go inside, we turn on our lights when the sun goes down so we can still have light. And when we're hot, we turn on the air conditioner. Or when we are cold at night, you know, we just got all these things that we can do to try and help push and pull against this relationship that we're supposed to have with the natural world. But let's face it, most of us dominate it. This is kind of what we do. But how do we step back into relationship? Land acknowledgements have become one of those spaces. But the problem is that most people run through their land acknowledgement and then they create it and then they tick their box and they put it in all of those places and everybody says them and then everybody moves on. And if we're really talking about returning back to relationship and right relationship, then really the possibility is that that is an ongoing exploration and dialogue. And perhaps those words shift a little and they change a little every day because you as the person speaking them, you shift a little and change a little every day. Are you ever the same human being? I'm on the road right now. I woke up today, I miss home. I'm a little sad in my heart. So maybe when I start my land acknowledgement starts with, I need a deep breath. I need to center. I need to understand where my heart is so that when I say those words, they really are the reflection of what their intention is meant to be, which is, hello, I'm a human being and I'm a member of this world. And I recognize that I'm standing on a piece of land that had once an original human being relationship that knew this landscape better than anybody. And not only knew this landscape better than anybody, but knew what it meant to be in the right relationship with this space with their hands and their hearts and their spirits and their minds and all of their being. So I'd like to say hello to those folks because I know they're here. And then say thank you for letting me be here. And I'll try really, really hard to hear those original instructions that you have to offer for that land stewardship that you have held for millennium. And I'll try my best to be a good ally and a good visitor and a good member of that ecology while I'm here, so that when you come home to my ecology, hopefully you'll be a good guest too. And you leave a good part of who you are there. So when I enter into the conversations of land acknowledgement, my first reaction is to say, they're beautiful, they're necessary, thank you. Please let them breathe. Please let them grow with you. And please let those words, every time you say them, have a reverberance of truth. It doesn't mean you have to be perfect every day. It just means take that deep breath, acknowledge where you are, really who you are that day. Maybe a deep, good self-center might be good for you, might be good for the world too.
Thank you, Sarah. So I want to let those words sit for just a little while. And Alma, can I ask, there are follow-up questions to this question, correct? On decolonization and settler colonialism?
Yes.
Can you read those? Because my response is going to include also a response to those.
I don't have any specific ones. I have
Okay,
the
well
ones
then
that
let
we
me
have
just,
on our. So why don't you go ahead and
why
introduce?
don't I just do my thing and we'll
Great.
get to it. Sarah's absolutely right. At the end of our talks, conversations with groups of people about land acknowledgements, we just want to ask the question, how does this land acknowledgement statement that you have made for yourself, how does that live in your daily life, in your work, in your play? Is it more than just a statement? One of the things that we have learned in our work, and I know Sarah experiences this as much as we do, is that oftentimes when we are interacting with other groups doing land acknowledgement statements, those groups are often operating out of DEI initiatives, or to say differently, a social justice framework. And one of the points I want to make tonight is that the social justice framework is insufficient to address Indigenous issues. So for example, a land acknowledgement statement is supposed to be exclusive to the group of people upon whose land your institution or organization sits. And it could be a group or groups, right? But in that sense, a land acknowledgement statement is exclusive to a particular group or groups of people. The DEI initiatives, of course, in the social justice framework champion inclusivity. And so oftentimes we bump heads as Native peoples with the framework that's provided by social justice. And that happens in so many different ways in the work that we do. So if I could add anything, in particular today for you to pay attention to, is that the indigeneity piece that we're referencing oftentimes in our conversations is often not part and parcel DEI models and DEI frameworks and the social justice framework. So in order to attain justice or equity for Native peoples, it has to be added in. And it has to be understood and it has to be addressed. The other thing about land acknowledgement statements that is hugely important for us to convey to people is that land acknowledgement statements are for you. They are not for us. We know who we are and we know whose land we're on. We don't need to say it. So please don't ask us to read it. Land acknowledgement statements position you as non-Native peoples as settlers on someone else's land. What does that mean for you? That's the question. In many ways, it means that you as a settler are complicit in the ongoing maintenance of capitalistic, colonialist, and sometimes supremacist practices, whether you recognize it or not. Those tend to be disadvantageous, of course, to communities of color. So I will stop there.
So this was about the time we were thinking maybe we would do another breakout group. And if we were going to do that and leave people, I mean, Jonathan, you just left us with a question, which is a good one for us to think about and engage with people on. What would be the question you would leave people with in the breakout group?
Well, I think in regards to the efforts that you all are making in regards to climate justice, to ask the question, what does it mean to be a settler and be advocating for ecological restoration and equity for groups of color in the relationship between those two? What does that look like for you? Let me say it this way. When I arrived here in the peninsula and started doing a lot of ecological restoration work and trying to acquire land, we bumped into a lot of land trusts and a lot of ecological restoration organizations. They espouse these wonderful ideals in their care for our land and management of the land. We're very grateful for the work that they do. But the one question historically that they have failed to ask is whose land are they caring for in the first place? Why? Why have they failed to ask that question? One answer is because if they did ask and get an answer to that question, they would have to give up some of their privilege and entitlement in managing our lands.
Sarah, anything to add for people in the breakouts?
No, I think it's a beautiful reflection. You know, really, it's in a lot of ways, Jonathan's asking us, you know, and I include myself in that because, you know, remember, we're talking about a space in the Bay Area, and we're talking about the population of the Bay Area, and the population of the Bay Area is California Native people. And though Indigenous I may be, I'm a guest in the Bay Area. I'm Yaqui and Irish. And so my lineage, my ancestry, those songs that sing to me and inform me of my responsibilities to land stewardship and my communities and the world around me, they inform me from somewhere not San Francisco Bay Area. I'm a guest. When I show up, I have to first look to my Northern California Native family and say, how do I be a good ally? And this is what Jonathan's asking us to reflect on. How do we be good allies? Because I think Jonathan might be the only person on this call who has ancestral relationship to the Bay Area. So all the rest of us have to ponder that question.
Okay, so Sarah and Jonathan, our next question is, are land back, rematriation, and Indigenous sovereignty essential to ending the climate crisis? Whichever one of you wants to start.
Thank you. I think I'm going to jump in. Wow, land back, remade. Yeah. I don't know if they're essential to, you know, all of the conversations that might be on the table here, but they're certainly essential to my community. I'd like to see, and certainly to the communities that we serve. I will say that it is a general reflex that I've witnessed amongst most Native communities that I've been a part and have the privilege to sit in good circle with, that making large generalized statements doesn't help anyone. And that making, you know, kind of, again, it's kind of like that slippery slope that we're talking about with land acknowledgements. It's like, once you think you've defined it in this and established it, that you're kind of done and you can disengage from some part of ongoing relationship with it. And so it's a similar slippery slope when you ask that question, because honestly, if you ask many different Indigenous folks what rematriation means to them, you're going to get a huge diversity of responses. And that doesn't mean that they're wrong or right. It means that what rematriation as a concept and movement and verb action, what that means to that particular Indigenous community or tribe or group of people is what's right for them, because that's what they've defined it as for themselves. And that's what they would like to have people respond to them with inside of that framework. Now, rematriation to, say, for example, seed keepers, Indigenous seed keepers who've really kind of taken on that rematriation language and really helped to give it some movement in the world here, that seed rematriation conversation, that's going to have a lot to do with the voice of Native women, right? But perhaps rematriation in the concept of land or land back or Indigenous sovereignty, while will be birthed from the voices perhaps of Indigenous women, will be strengthened by the voices of many in the circle. So you've got a lot of shifting and moving when it comes into how we define some of these movements or some of these language topics. I think it's important that any time a group wants to try and tackle these as a subject, that you define for your group, you get some good agreement on what you mean, right? Because that nuanced kind of issue is important here. Now, land back again, right? Similar concept. Returning land to an Indigenous group or an Indigenous organization is an amazing and beautiful concept. I think everyone should enter into that relationship. And yet, it is a spider web of complexity. A spider web of complexity. And as a nonprofit, or as a part of a nonprofit organization that is currently walking through a land back project, one that I have to take a deep breath before I kind of acknowledge the enormity of what that means to my organization, but to me as an Indigenous person, but also really to the circle of service that I'm really here for. That is an incredible gift. And yet I can tell you from a really kind of Western perspective that this land back project has been very difficult. And one that, had we not kind of taken a little good extra care for, or had some very, kind of luck from creation to support us through this project well, getting land is an expensive endeavor in our current Western framework. And quite frankly, returning land can be the kind of gift that can bring a small tribal group to its knees. So we have to be careful what we mean when we say we're giving gifts or giving land back. Again, get really clear on what you want, what you mean, what you're really talking about. And one of those places to potentially get very clear with first is that group of community that you are in service to. Where are you standing? Where is that land? What is that project? And then find that group to connect to and bridge some conversations with, and then see, is seed rematriation where you're at? Is land back where you at? Is Indigenous sovereignty projects where you at? Because my job is to show up as a good ally. My job is to not show up and say, oh, I've got good solutions, come listen to me. Which is kind of the reflex of what most of us are in, right? Because most of this dominant framework teaches us like we're specialists, we get our PhDs, like we are at the top of our game. And so we have answers. So let's get together and get our answers out there to go do good things for people. Now, as a general reflex, that's beautiful. And we say, thank you. Now, but if you're going to come do it for our community, we would like you to beautifully stop and bow first and listen to what we need before you come to us with solutions. And that might be part of the real vital thing that you need to solve the questions you're trying to solve in this circle. Jonathan?
Thank you, Sarah. Well said. And I concur, of course. A lot of the contemporary rhetoric of the land back / rematriation movement comes out of the rhetoric of decolonization. And I know this group, I believe, has read the article, Decolonization is Not a Metaphor. It's a great article, it's a great starting point, but it has some serious flaws. One of which, as Sarah just said, it positions land back and rematriation as an ideal. And, so when non-native peoples are championing this idea of land back, I'm like, my question is, whose land are you talking about? Is it yours? Because I know you're not giving your land back because I haven't seen any of it yet. So whose land back is it in the first place? But the article Decolonization as a Metaphor sets up land back as its ideal because it uses a very narrow conception of colonialism as its model, which is, it says, colonialism is defined by the removal of native peoples from their land. Therefore, the solution is to give native peoples back their land. So let's just do that and everything will be okay. The problem with that argument is that colonialism was accompanied by a whole set of also colonizing institutions. And if you give us our land back, we still have to pay taxes on that land, right? We still have to manage that land. And that land is surrounded by all kinds of other colonial structures and places. So simply giving land back is never sufficient. And as Sara very clearly said, I'll say it just a little bit differently because it's a point worth repeating. If you gave us 1,000 acres today, we would say no, because we do not have the financial, legal, and human resources necessary to manage that land. In other words, it has to be land back plus capacity. And it is far too easy to just say, give them their land back. That is the fundamental problem with that ideal. And I'm going to go back to what Sara said earlier as well, but I'm going to use different language here. The problem is that non-native peoples use that to think that they're helping. And that thinking that you're helping gets embedded in the rhetoric of, or the sort of model of white saviorism. But in this case, it really is settler saviorism that we're talking about here. And if you're not consulting with Native peoples on what is best for them, and you're making the decision in advance without their consultation, what is best for them, then you are in fact a settler savior, which is hugely problematic, of course. So land back and rematriation have, as Sara said, this really deep complexity to them. It is too easy to say, give Native peoples their land back, because there are so many other questions and complexities that need to be resolved before that actually ever happens. Is Indigenous sovereignty essential for, for climate justice and the work that you all are doing? And to some degree, I would say yes, and I'm going to qualify that in a minute here, but Indigenous sovereignty to a great degree is defined by Indigenous perspectives on land. So again, land trusts and ecological restoration organizations always talk about what they're doing to the land. But if you're Native, we're going to talk about what we're doing with the land. And that's a radical difference. And that difference is defined by our perspectives. So if you're lacking those perspectives on your interconnectedness with all things, plants and animals, as Sara said earlier, we're all equal, we're all the same, we're all necessary for this world to exist in a sort of healthy whole. Please don't come to our village and ask us to share our culture with you. I hate to say it this way because it sounds a little crass, but go get your own. At one point, all of us were Indigenous, and we had that relationship with the earth and with all things. It was necessary for us to survive. So if you need it to help inform your perspectives on your relationship with your work in regards to climate justice, go get it. Please don't come ask for ours. And so I think that is a really important point. You have the same capacity as Native peoples do to have that relationship with the earth. And I think it is essential, to answer the question, it is essential to have that perspective and understanding, I think, in order for climate justice to be realized at bare minimum in the ecological piece, with the ecological piece of that puzzle. Sara, did you want to add anything?
No, I think I think that was beautifully stated. And to be honest with you, there is this kind of interesting dialogue that we have. Folks are interested in the Indigenous perspective because there are different ways of knowing and being in the world. And we are looking for more inspiration and diversity because we do understand that the current kind of monoscope world that we've found ourselves in is not super awesome. So there's some support networks that are needed out there to create some balancing effects here. So we get the questions and we understand why these traditional knowledge systems are so kind of important to bringing back some of what we've lost to the conversation. But the really beautiful part of what you're saying, what Jonathan's saying that I hear in me is that ancient traditional relationship has existed on every landscape on this planet. And And all of us have it. I said earlier, my relationship is Yaqui. This is the traditional territory of the relationship that I carry through my relationship with my father. But my mother's blood comes from an Irish perspective that has songs and traditions and stories and land relationships and languages and ceremonies that are just as ancient and just as deep and just as full of knowledge that I know is just as informative to me and who I am in my indigenous or native relationship to the world. We all have this story capacity available to us. We know some of it's a lot farther away than it is for others, but that's part of our journey here. This is part of our human relationship in this space, is to get the full scope of that picture and to find it for each one of us and to bring it forward in our daily practice.
And I would add to one final thing before we move into opening it up. In the rhetoric that a lot of non-natives use in framing themselves as sort of in the context of the decolonization of their lives, like we want to decolonize our lives, we hear that. And so in a sense, you're shedding colonialism. That's what you're doing. But the question the sort of question that I never hear really answered is, you're shedding this, you're leaving this, but what are you moving to? Right? So decolonization is all about shedding, but where's the question about where it is you're heading to when you shed that? And I think part of the answer is in, Sara and my sort of appeal to you all to find those answers in some measure in other traditions, because it's too dangerous to take ours. Non-native peoples have taken just about everything possible from native peoples. And the only thing we really have left is our culture. And so we are, at least in our group, we are very careful with sharing our sacred knowledge and spiritual traditions with other people, because once we do, it has the potential to undermine our culture. And sovereignty, one definition of sovereignty is that sovereignty is defined by cultural continuance, not just self-determination, but cultural continuance. Cultural continuance is our ability to carry ourselves forward into the future as a culturally distinct group with a shared ancestry. And if we share our culture, we lose that distinctiveness, and that undermines our sovereignty. So we have to be very careful with what we share. So that's what part of the reason why we're saying we're happy to share what we can with you, but there are limits to what we can share, and you should actually be looking for your own. And if they're not there, you can't find them, then you can recreate those or reanimate those is probably a really good term. We should spend some time with questions on them.
Okay, there is one more question that was in the program description. So I can pose that question because it sounded like Sara and Jonathan, you were interested in hearing from the group. And I have one question in the chat. So the question, the fourth question that was in the program description is, what are the obstacles and opportunities for climate activists in building relationships and supporting the work of Indigenous people? And I can also, once we kind of get through figuring out how to facilitate that, I can also pose the question that came to me in the chat.
Well, I'll answer that very briefly and quickly, and Sara can do what she wants, but none of the work that we do is done in isolation. We always need partners. And our partnerships are ideally a part of the relationships that we're building with other groups in the work that we're doing. So we need partners, we need allies. We can't possibly do all this work ourselves. So we're grateful for the opportunity. But as Sara said earlier, you should be coming to us and asking how you can help, not coming in with an idea of how you can help.
Yeah, actually, I think it's just a good final question, Alma. And it's one that I would actually almost kind of reflect back to yourselves. You've heard a lot from us this evening. We've talked a lot. And I almost would say, how do you feel now that you've, kind of heard a lot of where we've taken you? How would you answer that question? Because, it's part of that, maybe even that breakout group, that last breakout conversation you just had. How do you show up to be a good ally? And and perhaps you're already thinking well into that space. So yeah, I would just kind of reflect that back.
So it sounds like that was an invitation from folks in the gallery. And also, I thought maybe I can invite Wei Tai, who's the one that chatted me the question. Maybe you could ask your question and any other thoughts you have listening to that last question as well.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Wei Tai from the San Francisco Bay Area. Fantastic conversation. Both of you are incredibly articulate, and it was really eye-opening, and loved hearing everything you had to say, because to me, it's almost like you're not here to tell us the answers, but there's just a lot of riddles to figure out, that like there are almost no answers, or not any easy answers. And one of the not too easy answers or questions I have is about the question of settlers. I'm an immigrant. My mother was a refugee from China, and so I grew up in Virginia, so we learned a lot about Native peoples. But what we don't learn in school is that, when Americans came to this country, wiped out the Native people, right, and took the land, right? And then whoever that colonizer was eventually sold it to somebody else, who sold it to somebody else, who sold it to somebody else, who now, when we go out and look at the real estate market here, it's $1 million for a piece of land. You got to buy it, and then it's your land. It's my land that I bought it. But if you really ask that tough question, I think that Jonathan is asking us, if you say, well, I bought it from somebody who bought it from somebody who bought it from somebody who, probably killed somebody to take this land, then I'm complicit, right? And if I say this is my land, and if I make a land acknowledgement, it's almost hypocritical to say a land acknowledgement if you don't also acknowledge that what does it mean to say I live on somebody else's land, but it's still mine, right? And that, I think, it's a very difficult place for all 300 million Americans who have either bought or rented something here. What do we do? Because we are in this continuum of injustice, right? As a colonizer, we're the 100th colonizer of this piece of land, and to figure out how do we back ourselves into an ethically, what is just, what is justice? I don't know the answer to that, but I find it's obviously a very uncomfortable question if we really asked ourselves, what the heck this means, and are we sincere every time? I don't feel comfortable about making that land acknowledgement, because I think it can be superficial. Although, Sarah, you've given us some techniques of how to make it authentic each time, and I appreciate that. But at the same time, I think if we're not willing to take that next step and say, oh yeah, the land I own, how would I make reparations way back, to others? I don't have an answer. So I don't know if you have an answer, but those are just things I've been thinking about that prompted from the discussion. So I appreciate and thank you for challenging us with that.
Thank you, Wei Tai. Sarah or Jonathan?
I'll start. We encounter this kind of question very often in lots of different ways. And as Sarah again was saying very eloquently earlier, this is a huge complexity here. It's not easy to understand. The question about, for example, about how do immigrants to this country think about themselves as settlers? How do people who are forced to come here as slaves think about themselves as settlers, right? Those questions are very difficult to ask, and frankly, I don't have an answer. I don't know that Sarah does either. It's a very complex thing. Oftentimes, and this has happened actually frequently, but I'll have grad students who call me up and are just completely sort of flabbergasted about what they can do to help to make a difference. They want to see, again, this is a very Western European way of thinking about things, right? They want to see into the future some measure of success. And if they can't see it, they're stifled. And they go, well, we can't fix the thing, so why should we try in the first place? And I don't know what to do, and et cetera, et cetera. And my response is, we just have to, get together, start walking down the path, start working, and begin to make a difference. We can't let these ways of thinking about progress or success or solutions stifle us from doing this very important work together, as you all well know. So just do what you can with what you have. That's always been good enough. There's no overnight solution to this. We just have to keep moving forward. And for non-native peoples, if you don't know what to do, the bare minimum you can do is to help other settlers get it. That's a huge W for us, by the way, because we need allies to work together with in move forward.
Yeah, I know very few traditional communities who like didn't welcome guests. Honestly, I really don't. And if you think back to that, like Alma in your Korean background, or anybody else who represents this call, I imagine how it represents a huge amount of diversity already. So whoever you are, think of back to your family customs, your community customs, your social customs, perhaps your traditional customs, and like anywhere in there, did you never open your door and like feed guests and hang out and share good stories and do things like this? Is a common part of our human condition. Remember, what we're talking about, what you're hearing Jonathan, I keep kind of mentioning back to you, is like relationships. Keep showing up. Keep having the conversation. This is really, when you guys heard that classic native cliche, all my relations, is like one of those great classic cliches that Hollywood took for a ride. But you know what? There's actually truth in that one. We are here in relationship. This really matters to us. And I kind of think it matters pretty much all of the traditional culture. I've toured the world. I'm very grateful to be a cultural artist who has had the capacity to tour the world and shake the hands with other traditional cultures in their home places on other parts of this beautiful marble in Alma's background sky. So we've got a lot of similarities that I've so far seen reverberate, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing if I can see the similarity continue to reverberate. But when you get into most traditional cultures, this is very real. People don't really shut your door. You open your door, you feed your guests, you nourish them, you share good stories, and your guest usually has some good protocols from their own community. How many folks grew up with a grandma, somebody who said, leave it better than the way you found it? I see so many nodding heads. Yay, look, we found one. There's a great common first step. We are here to build relationships. We're here to get to know each other and our ecology and our landscape, because it's a relationship with them too. They have heartbeats. The wind sings. That river has so many stories to tell. That mountain has seen creation come and go. Just imagine the stories she has to share. We're here to show up for that relationship. And then we figure it out together because we're doing the good work together. That's where I would start.
So we're within the last 5 minutes of our time together. Any final comments before we bring the program to a close from Sara and Jonathan? All right, we'll let that be the last comments from you two. Thank you, Sara and Jonathan, for taking the time, for giving us so much of your heart. Thank you to our events co-chairs for helping us host this program. Carolyn for running tech. Thank you to our chapter leadership team, led by Bonnie and Harriet, for nurturing, supporting, and promoting today's program. Thank you for all of you for coming and for your interest and support and sincerity and support of our chapter and this program and our chapter's climate justice efforts. If you'd like to get more involved with the Climate Reality Project Bay Area chapter, we have information on our website about future programs, how to join the climate justice team. We are one of actually many teams. We have a membership team and an events team. We have a youth climate action team and a young adults team and a business engagement team and alliances, and I'm probably forgetting some. We are specifically on our climate justice team looking for people to help with writing and other communications with members on climate justice issues with our chapter membership and across other California chapters. Our climate justice team meets monthly on the first Thursday of every month. So we're meeting again May 5th, 5:30 to 7 p.m. And our next monthly Indigenous Voices Reading and Listening Circle is the last Thursday of the month. So the next one will be April 28th, 5:30 to 7. We have 3 minutes left. And any final words from the speakers before we bring it to a close?
None from me, but thank you all for being here and for listening.
Thank you.